بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا مولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي وصل وسلم على عبدك ورسولك سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. Okay, we are going to want to look at some definitions of the state. What is a state? And basically we are going to read this article in order to bounce our ideas against it, and obviously it is going to present some definitions. I haven't read the article, so it's a bit of an arrow in the dark, but it doesn't matter, because the purpose is not to read the article as such, but to use it in order to think through the issue. Okay, so the article is around 10 pages. I'll try to read one page in a session if possible, but that will vary obviously. Okay, so I stated a form of political association. Okay, I mean, in the first hand I'll agree with that, but I'll say state is a form of association. So, and there are many associations. State is a political association, but not every political association is a state. Not every association is a state. But I think it's important to understand, it's important to remember that one thing which I don't know what take this writer would have on this, but one thing I want to mention is, in my understanding, an association, for example, the same association in one aspect can be, for example, political. The other aspect, it can be non-political. So that it's not necessary that you have one association which is a political association and another association which is a non-political association. A same association can be from one aspect of political association and from other aspects. So in a sense, when we talk about state, there is some abstraction going on in there. We abstract it from the whole in which that particular organization exists. So for example, a society, for example, a family, for example. It's a form of association. It's from one aspect, it's part of society, or it's a social institution, but on the other hand, it's a state-like institution as well, because there is authority is involved there, and wherever there is an authority, there's some relation to a state, for example. Yeah. So a state is a form of political association, and political association is itself only one form of human association. That's fair enough. Other associations range from clubs to business enterprise to churches. Human beings relate to one another, however, not only in association but also in other collective arrangements such as families. So he is taking family as non-association. Why is not family an association? Obviously, it's not an association in the same sense in which voluntary associations exist. Neighborhoods, cities, religions, cultures, societies, and nations. Society itself has social aspects as well as political and statal aspect. Yeah, but I guess he's talking about society, abstraction, and nations in that sense, in abstraction as well, because nation, you can have a national state, but that doesn't exhaust the concept of nation as such. Okay. So the state is not the only form of political association. For example, other examples of political associations include townships, counties, provinces, condominiums, territories, confederations, international organizations such as the UN, and supranational organizations such as the EU. But like provinces, why can't the province be a state? I mean, many provinces define themselves as a state, so obviously they are not a state at the same level as the national state, but they're still a state, and that can even be townships and counties. So for example, in America, I mean, a lot of state in America, I'm talking about North America, and especially the United States, the United States emerged as a state from lower level states, the counties and townships and cities. But anyway, to define the state is to account for the kind of political association it is, and to describe its relation to other forms of human association and to other kinds of human collectivity more generally. Okay, so maybe we can define family as a collectivity rather than association. There's no easy matter for, I mean, this is no easy matter for a number of reasons. Okay. First, the state is a form of association with a history. So a state has a history. So state has a history mean historically different concepts of state have existed. One thing, I guess, and different types of states have existed. And different justifications for states have existed. Doesn't mean these things don't exist horizontally, but historically they are more prominent. So the state is a form of association with a history, so that the entity that is to be described is one that has evolved or developed. Evolved and developed. That shouldn't be treated as necessarily meaning that it has evolved or developed from simple to complex, or which or worse to better, or things like that. So that includes what we said, different concepts and different types. Okay, and this cannot readily be captured in a snapshot. I don't know how that is related, but anyway, the concept of the state itself has a history. Okay, so he is talking about here the actual state and here the concept, the history as well. People throughout the history has had different views of different theorizations of what a state is. So any invocation of the term will have to deal with the fact that it has been used in subtly different ways. Okay, number 3. Not all the entities that claim to be or are recognized as states are the same kinds of entity. So different types, since they vary in size, longevity, power, political organization, and legitimacy. Number 4. Because the state is a political entity, any account of it must deploy normative concepts. What that has to do with political entity is not immediately clear to me. So because the state is a political entity, any account of it must deploy normative concept, such as legitimacy is a normative concept here. Whether a state is a legitimate state or not, or what are the basis of its legitimacy in the eyes of obviously others as well as its own eyes, and in the eyes of its inhabitants. Because when you legitimacy is a normative concept in the sense, because when you raise the question of legitimacy, you raise the question of what is, but also what should be, and if something is as it should be, on what basis, etc. So, because the state is a political concept, and any account of it must deploy normative concept. That seems to imply that all political entities must deploy normative concept. I guess that claim can be justified, but it's not readily obvious to me why a political entity must necessarily involve normative concepts that are themselves as contentious as the notion of the state. Although the state is not uniquely difficult to define, these problems need to be acknowledged. Okay. At this point, these points, some of them at least, are very abstract because we are not dealing with any particular definitions. The aim of this paper, okay, is to offer a definition of the state that is sensitive to these difficulties. More particularly, it seeks to develop an account of the state that is not subject to problems that beset alternative explanations that have been prominent in political theory. Okay. The main points it defends are these. The state should not be viewed as a form of association that subsumes or subordinates others. Does it mean necessarily? Because in a sense, a state subordinates other forms of associations to a certain extent. Subsume would be going a bit too far, but subordination is obvious. Obviously, it will depend on the strength of a state. But the state should not be viewed as a form of association that subsumes or subordinates all others. Of course, it doesn't sub all other, but it subordinates to a certain extent all others. Otherwise, so at least we can say that its ambition is, especially the modern state, is all encompassing. How can it, how much its ambitions are, it is all encompassing in its ambitions, but how much it is able to actually do that varies depending on the actual strength of a state and other things as well, which will come up, I guess. The state is not an entity whose interests map closely to the interests of groups and individuals that fall under its authority, but has interests of its own. I'll assume that that's true of any association. It always, if it is to perpetuate, it's always going to develop its own interests. The state is, to some extent at least, number 3, the state is an alien power. Though it is of human construction, it is not within human control. Well, that can be said of many other things, like even society, you can say about that. You can say that about language, for example. Number 4, the state is not there to secure people's deepest interest. Well, that depends on the type of state, isn't it? And does not serve to unify them, reconcile them with one another. It might try to bring their competing into harmony, or realize that any important good such as justice, freedom, or peace, while its power might be harnessed from time to time, that will serve the interest of some, not the interest of all. That's a very contentious point, especially the earlier part. The secure people deepest interest, and does not serve to unify them, reconcile them with one another, bring them competing interests into harmony. It tries to do all of these things. Many states try to do. How successful they are, that's something else. But they obviously, especially modern states, do all these things. But I can grant that some states might not do that. So that's something else. The state is thus an institution. What do you mean by thus? Through which individuals and groups seek to exercise power. Okay. As in any entity, an individual or group of people try to use a state. So, though it is not the only such institution, but it is also that exercise power over individuals and groups. That's obvious, I guess. State exercises power over individuals and groups. The state is ultimately an abstraction. Well, society is an abstraction too, so that's not a news. For it has, but that doesn't mean that state is not something concrete as well. For it has no existence as a material object, is not confined to a particular space, and is not embodied in any person or collection of persons. Yes. But we can say, in a sense, it's a collection of institutions, for example. The state exists because certain relations between people. The state exists because certain products are obtained between people, and so does the society. But the outcome of these relations is an entity that has a life of its own. That's true, but that will apply to a lot of things. Like, for example, society as well. Though it would be a mistake to think of it as entirely autonomous. How can it be entirely autonomous? Because if it is a function of the relationships, but it might be autonomous to the extent that it takes its own form beyond those relationships, as long as those relationships are sustaining it. Okay. Though it would be a mistake to think of autonomy, and to define the state is to define the state is to try to account for the entity that exists through these relations. That's true, but takes some sort of distance from or autonomy from these relations, as long as those relations exist. Okay, so I think that's a good point too. So we had one page. It's a good point to stop. Okay, I'll see you next time. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل صلاة كاملة وسلم سلاما تاما على سيدنا ومولانا محمد الذي تنحل به العقد وتنفرج به الكرب وتقضى به الهوائج وتنال به الرغائب وحسن الخواتيم ويستسقى الغمام بوجهه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه في كل لمحة ونفس بعدد كل معلوم لك. اللهم في هذا اليوم المبارك فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين.